innovation, to be honest, requires innovative ways of financing. There's no way you can finance innovation by using the traditional sources of financing. Don't talk about banks in the equation unless banks, bid something on the side that will probably be focusing on financing innovation, but not using traditional balance sheet of banks to finance innovation. That won't happen, and don't even cry for that. So what we need to do is to grow and nurture alternative sources of financing, which of course will respond to what the needs, what are the needs of innovation. Because innovation, as we see it, is split. We see innovation driven by entrepreneurs through startups. We see innovation driven by corporates through R&D and other institutions as well. We see innovation driven by academia, whether it's universities and other research institutions. But we also see innovation driven by NGOs. Which, if you ask me, I would say, okay, this has been a sweet spot for majority of development partners, providing grants to NGOs probably to do some innovation in the socio-economic space, which would probably need to change, and the thinking should not be about NGOs, and the thinking should go straight to social enterprises, type of organizations that can scale, because scaling an NGO is a myth. You can only scale a social enterprise. So what can we do in the market? Of course, the report says clearly, we need to develop all these different forms of financing, from venture capital, private equity, if it's crowdfunding, to all these other spectrum of financing which we usually don't see in the market. So Tanzania in particular, we are at the very nascent stage in terms of developing all these different forms of financing. Just to update the panel or other people in the webinar, we have few developments in the market already. If you compare 5 years ago and where we are today, over the past 5 years, we have seen venture capital investments in Tanzania in excess of $200 million. So there is financing coming to the market. In terms of angel investors who tend to finance early stage businesses, that would probably the traditional graduates of hubs from Mr. Jones. These are type of businesses which are in most cases pre-seed to seed stage. Some don't have revenue. Some probably only have a prototype they need to validate to commercialize. So all these type of ventures probably need people like angel investors. So we launched an angel network 2 years ago, where it's a culture that we're still building, because we believe we can tap local capital that we can allocate for companies. In most cases, we see the majority of venture capital is coming down to Africa. Unfortunately, is not local capital. And when it's not local capital, it tends to have sort of foreign behavior when it comes to financing. 40% of all the venture capital money you see coming to Africa comes from the US, and more than 30–40%, of course, come from Europe. So if this is the type of funds that are coming to the market, the type of financing that will go to innovation won't necessarily be locally driven. This will come with a Silicon Valley type of thinking, and as a result, majority of entrepreneurs who are innovating won't be able to access this type of financing. Go to Kenya. Kenya is a leading recipient of venture capital money in East Africa. But the money that goes to local founders who are innovating is only 7%. So we're talking about more than $1.5 billion. It's only 7% going to local innovators. So what does it mean? It means we need to have innovation and funds that are innovated locally to finance the type of innovation which are grown from the backyard. And who should do that? So we have different players who can do different roles. One is the typical venture capital investors in private equity, whether it's local, whether it's foreign, but they have their role to play. But these are type of investment which would tend to go at a growth stage of a company. The company which has revenue, it has a growth scale. Secondly, of course, is angel investors. If you ask me, I'll tell you we need local source of financing. So people like Dr. Flora, who is a diaspora, sending money back home. How can we tap 10% of our remittances every year to finance startups? Because to be honest with you, we receive 1 trillion shillings every year as remittances. But most of this money is spent on non-productive activities. Of course, some are very critical, healthcare, education, housing. But how can we tap at least part of that money and allocate it for startup financing and financing innovation in this country? So there's a key role that we can use. Tanzanians in Tanzania who are living in the country, living outside the country, foreigners living in Tanzania who would probably want to use part of their annual earnings and finance this type of.
Thank you so much, Salum.
Just two things. One is the government. I'll just talk about the government, because the government has a critical role to play in this space. We see governments always coming up with funds. And of course, the government currently has more than 42 funds. How can we, rip apart only 10 funds and put one huge fund that can be dedicated for financing innovation, and leave the rest of the funds probably to do whatever that they're doing? And currently, of course, the other thing that we are struggling with is how can we use the money from development partners to unlock and to de-risk these startups to attract private money. So currently, I'm involved with my other colleague, working with the UNDP, and of course with my colleagues from HDIF, COSTECH, and DFID, to develop an innovation fund that will be used as a catalytic fund to finance early stage startups, to unlock them to attract private money, say 3-4 years down the road. So these are some of the things that we can use in some of the structures. Of course, universities have a huge role to play. If you go to other markets, universities have endowment funds. They can take 10% of the endowment funds and finance all these innovations that we see in the market. So if it is Nelson Mandela University, probably they can have an innovation fund, or they can have an endowment fund and use 10% of that money to finance innovators who are graduating from the university, coming to the market, who later down the stream, they can be picked up by people like ourselves to give them the commercial capital that they needed to grow and scale.